Welcome back from the break, everybody. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Bentzi Karsh from University of Wisconsin. I'm not alone here in saying that just having Bentzi here, having him contributing to this work has been both wonderful and he's just added so much to this. One of the real foundations of not only the pediatric work, but also the EHR usability evaluation protocol, the EUP or NIST IR 7804, is this connection between usability and safety. And this is really, really groundbreaking work, and it really forms the foundation of that. So without taking more of his time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Karsh. Thank you.
Engineer is always the one without the tie. So it's truly an honor to be here. I don't have any conflicts. I'm an engineer, so I don't even know how to pronounce the drugs that I could mention. I've been very fortunate to have been funded for the last 10 years by AHRQ and NIH to study the impact of health information technologies on clinician cognitive work. So how does usability affect their ability to think and problem solve and forecast and sense, and therefore treat and diagnose? And the research evidence is very, very clear that there's a strong link between usability and safety, and I've been asked to give a brief 15-minute set of evidence of that with regard to the science. But this has also become very personal for me. Some of you know that last year at the age of 39, I had a surprise diagnosis of an aggressive cancer. And so I have now been interacting with the healthcare system some weeks every single day, and on average 3 to 5 times a week. And I have experienced what bad usability can mean for safety. I've also experienced, and this is important, what good usability design can mean for good safety. I've watched as the doctors and nurses could suddenly access my records because in Madison we have a local health information exchange at other local hospitals and clinics to pull my records to make decisions. I've seen them trend lab values so they could see whether or not I'm charting appropriately based on chemotherapy. But I've seen the reverse too. And so my main take-home message is that when we talk about usability and safety, this isn't about just proving the negative. It's about the reverse too, which is that better usability means better safety as well. So the agenda is to really focus on the scientific underpinnings of usability and safety, go through the framework then published in this NIST document, and talk also about some of those critical user interactions. I think it's important, though, to start by having you not believe me that usability and safety are linked, but to look at what some other very smart folks have said, the Institute of Medicine, the FDA, President's Council of Advisors. The IOM, health IT can add an additional layer of complexity, which can lead to unintended adverse consequences because of usability. That shows the link. Dick Sawyer in the second bullet, if you haven't read Do It By Design, which is at the FDA, and you want to learn more about usability and safety, find Dick Sawyer's document called Do It By Design. He writes design-induced errors, and that phrase alone is key. He doesn't say user errors. He said errors that happen because the design induced it can lead to patient harm, even by the most skilled users. And that is also an important contribution. It's a myth that as those of you who are balding or gray leave practice, and it's suddenly more computer-savvy people that we're not going to experience usability issues. It's a myth. Computer skills help. They don't overcome usability problems. And you can see the comment by the President's Council as well. But also outside of healthcare, one of my favorite quotes linking usability and safety, particularly in the field of aviation, has the importance of the human requirements and equipment design come to be recognized. There's probably no other engineering field in which the penalties for failures to suit the equipment to the human requirements. And I'm going to pause. This was a watershed moment 65 years ago when Paul Fitts, one of the founders in the US of human factors engineering, didn't say, in order to get the people to do what the technology needed them to do. He said, to fit the technology to the people. That was a game changer. Are so great. With present equipment, flying is so difficult, many individuals can't learn to pilot an aircraft safely. The point has been reached where as we put in more things, it's decreasing overall effectiveness of the pilot by increasing complexity. As the aircraft becomes more complex, the necessity again for designing the machine to fit the human is important. 65 years ago, and substitute clinician for pilot, right? Substitute health IT for cockpit, and you hear some of the concerns people have had. And it took aviation 50 years to become what they now call ultra safe. We don't want things to have to take that long. So here's my ugly, ugly diagram to explain the science behind usability and safety, but it's also one of the most powerful ones because of its simplicity. So on your left, you see something called the system. That's everything about the patient. That's what is in the patient's head about the patient. That's what the caregiver knows about the patient. It's what's in the paper records. It's in the computer records, as well as the paper and computer records at the other clinics and hospitals they may have visited. At any given moment, what's in the middle is that display. And that display is showing you some unknown fraction of that entire patient system. And then you have what's on the right. In part, based on what the clinician is looking at that moment, that forms their understanding of this entire system. Now, the display isn't the only thing. If you're a primary care doc, this might be a continuity patient you've had for 30 years. You have expectations. You have your clinical knowledge. You have what the nurse told you after he or she roomed the patient, or you found out what you learned during rounds if you're in a hospital. All of those things shape it too. But part of your understanding about the entire situation of the patient is informed by, at that moment or those moments, what you're actually looking at inside of the display. That's why usability has such a direct link to safety. Here's another old picture that then completes the loop. So if you look here on the right, what you perceive, and in case of health IT, what you see on a display informs what you think is going on with your patient. And here's to complete the loop, that in part determines what you do. That means usability of the health IT affects what you think is going on and in part determines diagnosis and treatment action. That's your direct link between usability and safety. And in safety critical environments, usability can have safety consequences, good or bad, period, beyond dispute. If it's not a safety critical environment, we don't have safety issues with usability. If your TV remote control is designed really poorly, it may piss you off to no end every day that it takes you 15 minutes to turn on the TV. But chances are there won't be a safety implication. It may further anger you that when your parents come to babysit the kids, you have to give them an hour tutorial on how to use it. And you have to write them written instructions. But there still won't be a safety implication. Unless your 3-year-old can't watch Curious George, all bets are off. But normally it won't. But in healthcare, in aviation, in nuclear power, ship navigation, power grid management, usability has safety implications because the domain has safety implications. And that's why we have that link. And with health IT, as we've heard earlier, there can also be adoption issues. So this becomes really important. And this shouldn't be controversial inside of healthcare. Other agencies, Department of Defense, FAA, NASA, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, believe this very, very strongly. In fact, you have there on your left, Department of Defense just updated their standards January of this year. Nuclear Regulatory Commission on your right, massive compendiums of design standards and guidelines that say this is how you should design technologies for our men and women who serve us in uniform or for the people who are dealing with nuclear power. And these are long. These aren't high-level documents that just say use user-centered design. These are very, very specific. I'll just take you to the middle arrow. And this is a snapshot out of 659 pages. Information must be compared or mentally integrated, should be presented in close spatial proximity. Yet what did we just see earlier with the growth charts? That's information that must be presented in close spatial proximity. That wasn't. For all of you who practice, how many tabs do you have to go through to see information that must be mentally integrated that is not in close spatial proximity? These are things we know. These are things that could be applied. But I know you still may not believe that there's a direct relationship between usability and safety. So for the first time today, we have audience participation. And everybody has to play along. And I will know. So I am going to put up on the next slide a bunch of lab values. So listen carefully. You are to determine as quickly as you can and as accurately as you can how many values are out of range. Once you know that number, close your eyes and raise it. Can everyone see what I'm doing here? I want you to do this. Some of you will do this. Don't peek. I want you to do this. And I'm going to time you. Ready? Go. When you know how many, close your eyes and raise your hand. 10 seconds, nobody. Close your eyes and raise them high. I want to know when everyone's figured it out. Stop peeking. 15 seconds. Only about half the room. 25 seconds has just gone by. Not everybody has their hand up. Everyone's got to play. 30 seconds. Guys, come on. A couple of you still dangling. Remember, don't peek. Some of you are looking with your eyes with your hand raised. All right. Keep your eyes closed. No. Keep your eyes closed and your hand raised. I'm going to call the time at 45 seconds. Keep your eyes closed and your hand. Keep your eyes closed. I see you peeking. With your eyes closed, with your outstretched hand, show me with your number of fingers how many are out of range. Now, some of you are hedging. Stop changing the number of fingers. I'm serious. Now, open your eyes and look around the room. I see ones, I see twos, I see fours, and I see threes. So the answer is 1, 2, 3, or 4. Well done, doctors and vendors. Great. So let's try this again. Everybody ready? Same thing, but you don't have to close your eyes this time. As soon as you know how many values are out of range, raise your hand. Go. So as funny as that might have been, this is actually very serious right now. So what was the difference between those two? In the first one, which by the way is still in one of the clinics I go, the way it's displayed, you have to serially identify a value. You then have to hold that in in working memory, compare it to a reference range, and then determine whether or not that value is in the reference range that you're looking at. So for each row, you have about 6 mental steps that you have to do. Then you had to remember whether or not it was out of range as you went to the next row. Compared to the second one, which is what we call in human factors engineering a direct perception display. You look, you see the answer, and you're done. Critically, both of those were decision support. When we think of decision support, we like to think about pop-ups and alerts and reminders. But just the way our data are displayed is decision support, and I proved it. Because about 20% of you would have made the wrong decision because you had a 2 or a 3. Some of you had 4 on your hands. The other important lesson here, both affected safety and efficiency. The good thing about better usability is better design means safer and it can mean faster. And that's what all of your clinicians want. Help me do the right thing faster. That's why good design makes a difference. And importantly, as the next speaker in the workshops are going to talk about, I was able to quantitatively prove that one of the displays for that challenge was superior. About 20% of you were inaccurate with the first display, 0% with the second display. I called it at 45 seconds with display 1. It was less than 3 seconds with display 2. Show that to people who might be wanting to purchase your systems. And you can start showing some of those kinds of hard data that are necessary to prove that something might actually be better. And if users are asking you for things, for those of you who are vendors that you're not sure are workable, you can empirically test those and provide some hard data. Oops, for some reason I'm not moving now. Forgot about this. How many of you are willing to bet, I hear in Washington, D.C. the popular bet's $10,000. $10,000 that you can tell me what the patient was. Raise your hand if you're willing to bet me $10,000 you knew what the patient was. Nobody? Seriously. So I know that it feels funny, but this also is actually an extremely, extremely serious point. Even when things that seem to be obviously easy, usable design to a vendor or even to a user, because I promise if a user was walked through that display and saw canine at the top, of course, type of patient is right at the top, I'll see that. That doesn't mean it's actually usable, and it doesn't mean it actually works until we can set up a context. And in this context, I said, how many lab values were out of range? And all of you guys went right to the lab value. So think about your own EHRs that dutifully display the patient name on top and ask yourself, really, how salient is that? And then ask yourself, what would a more powerful direct perception display be? You heard of one earlier. Maybe a picture would allow you to see a lot more rapidly. So in the NIST document 7804, and again, this is sort of something very similar to what Dr. Zhang just showed us as well. We talk about these critical usability problems and the outcomes that they can have. And again, these are ones that whether or not it's not specific to any kind of population, these are generic. So here we have these use errors, again, not user errors, use errors. Wrong patient record open. You saw how easy a second ago that was since you were actually treating a dog. Wrong mode of action. We heard about when you were actually thinking you're in pounds, but you're in fact in kilograms. Inaccurate data displayed sometimes is impossible to know if you don't have prior knowledge of this patient. Incomplete data display. Dangerous because A, you might not know it's incomplete and therefore you're making a decision with incomplete data, or you know it's incomplete but you have to go through multiple screens where information you have to mentally integrate is not spatially co-located. Non-standard measurements we had examples of. User required to recall information, again, because you have to go through different screens. Inadequate feedback. What is the EHR actually doing? Was the order placed? Was the message sent? I have no idea. Corrupted data storage. And fundamentally, all of these can lead to these kinds of adverse events that we've been hearing about and possibly can also lead to patient harm. And I guess what I'll leave you with is this. I think it's really important that we treat all of these critical usability problems in and of themselves as safety hazards because they can lead to these adverse events regardless of whether or not harm occurs. I say that not as NIST, not as ONC, as Bentzi, Karsh, human factors and safety engineer. We can't wait for a burden of proof that somebody got harmed. If we do, that's safety engineering from 50 years ago. Because in the manufacturing plants, it used to be, hey, we have an unguarded circular saw. No one got their hand cut off, must be safe. No, I'm being dead serious, I'm not making a joke. OSHA came along and said, no, the fact that you have an unguarded circular saw, you might lose a hand. Guard it. So I think we need to have that same philosophy. We shouldn't be waiting for the baby to get a 60-time overdose if we can simply see that we can put in a 60-time overdose. The fact that it can affect that performance is, I think, the standard that we need to think about. So anyhow, thank you very much for your time. We do not have time for questions, but I think we'll move along.
I'm just so happy to see Bentzi here presenting this because this is really the foundation of what we're doing. The other foundation is